So today we have to talk about NIHILISTER, technically the newest playable character in NIKKE even though she was introduced around 2 months ago. I was able to get her just recently, and so I took my time to properly test her out before doing my review/guide. In today's video, there are 2 things that I want to accomplish. First of all, I want to talk about NIHILISTER and give you my thoughts about her, my problems with her character and her kit, and I also want to bring up the things that she is actually good at. Because a lot of the content and discussion surrounding NIHILISTER only talks about her weaknesses for the most part. And I'm a firm believer that you should always take a look at the strengths and weaknesses of any character so that you can make a better and well-informed conclusion. I'm also going to talk about how good she actually is relative to the requirements for getting her. So I want to address that, also talk about how she compares to the other characters, if it's worth using her over the other options, and if she is a character that you should be spending your gems and resources on. For the second half of this video, I will be covering the usual guide stuff, talking about how to get the most value out of NIHILISTER, going over her best builds, playstyles, team comps, and basically everything you need to know to make this character work. Before we begin, I would highly appreciate it if you could drop a like and subscribe because I really put in a lot of effort in making sure that I give you the most accurate and useful videos possible. With that being said, let's jump right in. To start things off, let's actually talk about NIHILISTER and what she does. NIHILISTER is basically a burst type 2 attacker who can be best described as a battery support, pierce attack bot, and some sort of cheat code for specific bosses. Despite having the attacker label, NIHILISTER doesn't actually perform like your standard DPS unit. This is not something new because we have seen other characters have a specific label but also end up working differently. You can take a look at Privity, who is also an attacker, but she really is more like a support. And just recently, we got Dorothy, who is a support, but she does so much damage that she might as well be an attacker. So sometimes the class labels don't actually mean much. But the main reason why NIHILISTER is not a DPS in my opinion is simply because she can't put out good enough numbers to actually be called as one. So if you can't depend on her damage output, you have no choice but to look at the other things that she has to offer. One of the things that she is good at is being a battery support for your team. Basically, you can spam her normal attacks so that your team can generate more energy in a short period of time. In fact, there is actually a huge benefit to having NIHILISTER as your burst type 2 battery. For a lot of cases, especially in charge attack teams, main DPS characters like Alice will also be the one acting as a battery for your team. So whichever character is being used as a battery will be spamming their charge attacks to generate energy very fast. But in return, they will also be doing significantly less damage. But if you have NIHILISTER, you can use her as your battery instead, so that your main DPS can focus on doing fully charged attacks to do more damage. With that being said, even though NIHILISTER is a good battery, it's still not a good enough reason for you to use her. We already have other burst type 2 units who can produce similar if not better results if you simply want to improve your team's energy generation. So on top of being used as a battery, you should also need her piercing attacks. How this works is that whenever NIHILISTER does a fully charged attack, she gains a pierce effect for her next attack. So if NIHILISTER is repeatedly doing fully charged attacks, this effect will basically be permanent. On top of the pierce effect, her attacks will have a bigger radius, which is about the same size as Snow White's burst attack. So that will make it easier for you to hit multiple enemies at the same time. Because when you do hit 2 or more enemies, NIHILISTER will be doing slightly more damage to the enemies that you hit. This is overall really good because you are going to need someone that can pierce through enemies when you start to go up against stages where the enemies have a shield mechanic. And a really good example for this is the new boss that was added in the Union Raid. This boss in particular has a very tanky shield, and the only way to take it down fast is to shoot the boss part being protected by the shield. Of course, you can use characters like Alice and Laplace so that you can easily burst down the boss part. But sometimes you can still be a few attacks short from breaking it, so it's not a bad idea to have another character that can go through enemy shields. In addition to being a good option for a team battery and pierce attack support, she is also one of the only 2 characters that can slow down the time in the game. And this is actually pretty broken. How this works is that you can basically aim NIHILISTER's burst ability, and whenever you are aiming it, you will be slowing down everything in the game. This can be very useful because it means that dealing with enemy weak points is a lot easier. A lot of bosses in the game have weak points that only appear for a short period of time. But if you are able to slow everything down, you will have an easier time in dealing with the weak points. The only other character that can do this is Dorothy, but the advantage of using NIHILISTER is that you can basically pop a burst 1 ability like Litters before you slow down everything in the game. Do keep in mind that if you want to use this mechanic, that you should be aiming down using a character other than NIHILISTER. And also remember that this doesn't work if your active character is a sniper or rocket launcher user. So if you have NIHILISTER or Dorothy, this is definitely a mechanic that you should take advantage of. But outside of being a team battery, pierce attack bot, and speed manipulator for specific bosses, it's honestly very hard to recommend spending your gems for her, especially if you already have the other burst type 2 DPS units. As many of you might know, NIHILISTER is from the second part of the Liberation system, and the requirements just to get there is not easy to say the least. You have to beat chapter 20's stage 31, and you also have to get one of the first liberation characters. And after you finally get access to the second liberation, you will either have to spend a few months doing the daily missions if you decide not to use your gems, or you can speed up the process by refreshing so that you only trade in 30-point missions. I was turning in 30-point missions 6 times a day for a month and a half straight, and during that time, I usually spend around 300 gems on a good day, and I spend more than 1000 gems on a bad day, not even counting the gems that I spend when they ask me to buy something from the shop, or if they ask me to do an extra wipe on the outpost defense. So knowing all the requirements and how expensive it can be just to get Nihilister, it is definitely not worth all the trouble. Guilty, a character who is way easier to unlock, is also a character that is many tiers above Nihilister. So if you are working through, or you already finished the first part of the liberation, then I would say that it's better for you just to do the free missions for Nihilister and just get her whenever you can without spending gems. Because not unless you really like her as a character, I don't see why you would want to spend your gems just to get her early. And even if you won't be able to use her anytime soon, you are honestly not missing out on much. With that being said, if you do want to use her in your teams, I will now be going over the best ways to use her and talk about the things that you can do to maximize her value in your team. As we have talked about earlier in this video, Nihilister is best used as a battery support / pierce attack bot. She is one of the only few characters that have a pierce effect on their attack, so she can be very useful against different bosses that require a pierce effect to counter. To give you a refresher, her skill 1 gives Nihilister a pierce effect, radius increase, and additional damage on her attack. The pierce and radius buff is activated when she does a fully charged attack, and the extra damage is triggered whenever she hits 2 or more enemies. Her second skill is kind of just whatever, because it deals a very small amount of damage for a passive skill that only triggers once every 10 seconds. As for her burst, it does an okay amount of damage on a small AoE, while also dealing a small amount of burn damage for 10 seconds. Plus, it also increases her maximum ammo capacity for 15 seconds. Her abilities are a bit underwhelming, so you only really need the pierce effect from her skill 1. When it comes to her skill priorities, it will pretty much be the same across the board, regardless of whether you decide to use her as a pierce and battery support or actual DPS. You would want to prioritize her skill 1 because you will get the most value out of the bonus damage, and then you can go for her burst, and then you can save her skill 2 for last because it's not very impactful. When it comes to harmony cubes, that's when it depends. If you are going for a DPS Nihilister build, you can use the Onslaught cube for more charge damage, or the Adjutant cube if you want a slightly less charge time. But if you are going for a more utility-based battery support build, then you should be using a Wingman cube, so that you will always have enough bullets to get your team to full energy without having to reload. As for the stat priorities for the endgame equipment, you can go for the standard priorities for sniper units. Charging speed and max ammo capacity are the best ones, followed by increased attack and increased element damage. And then lastly, increased charge damage can also be a decent option. Moving on to team compositions. Nihilister is not really a character that you would want to build around. She works better as a utility support against specific bosses that require you to have any of the utility that she provides. So that's against bosses that have shields so that you can counter it using her pierce attacks. She is also good against bosses with hard to shoot down weak points because you can slow down the game by holding down her burst. And so overall, that's about everything I have for Nihilister. I tried to look more on the bright side of things in this video because 90% of the threads and videos I have seen only talk about the downsides of Nihilister, which in my opinion is not the right way to look at any character because you always have to look at both the strengths and weaknesses of a unit to make a better and well-informed conclusion. With that being said, if you found this video useful, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. I will be releasing a Pilgrim tier list very soon, so definitely stay tuned if you wanna see that. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.